probably a good place to start actually on the God desire. I mean, it's it's a light-hearted topic, religion. Yeah, yeah. What made you want to write it? I guess.
Well, luckily, my previous book, Jews Don't Count, had been a success, and therefore I suddenly found myself in the privileged position of being able to write essay books that people will buy, and that's privileged partly because they don't have to be that long. But writing a book, having written quite long books, like novels and whatnot in my life, and I don't know, before I wrote kids' novels, I wrote 4 adult novels. That takes a long time. But one thing I really like about the essay book format, and I was asked to write The Jews Don't Count, not that specific subject, but to write an essay book by the Times Literary Supplement, and I said, I'll write about that. What I like about that form is that I'm able to drill down into a very specific part of what might be quite a big subject. So with anti-Semitism, it was specifically about what I saw as the progressive failure to sort of really include anti-Semitism in the way that they think about identity, and Jewish inclusion and Jewish representation and whatever. And in this one, it's not meant to be a book that covers the waterfront of religion, which obviously is a Encyclopedia Britannica book. It's meant to be specifically about my feeling that if you asked me why I don't believe in God, it wouldn't be about the problem of evil in the world or the fact that I don't think anything existed before the Big Bang or all the sort of standard conversations that people have about God, but it would be because I want to believe in God. And I remember once Omid Jalili, I quote this in the book, although it's in a play in the book, but it came from a moment when Omid Jalili, the British-Iranian comedian who was in my film, The Infidel, that I wrote, which is again about religion, because a Muslim who discovers he was born a Jew. He's a Baha'i, which is a religion that kind of believes all religions have validity. And we were in the trailer, and he said to me, after a long, heated debate about God, don't you want to believe in God? And I said, yes, desperately. That's why I know he doesn't exist. And the key word is desperately, because I think that there's a ferocious need that humans have to believe in something greater than themselves, something that will outsmart death, something that will give their lives meaning. And that's why we've created this thing over many centuries, this myth that there is something there that satisfies all that. And that's my principal reason for being an atheist. It's kind of a weird inversion. It's like, I love the idea of God. I would love there to be a God. And because I'm suspicious of that love, of wish fulfillment, that's why I don't believe in it. And that's what the book's about. And that's why it's quite short, because it's not trying to, cover the history of atheism as a philosophical idea.
Yeah, I suppose you do tend to see people either turning to God or turning away from God in times of crisis. I'm just curious, growing up, what was your views on religion? I know you're an atheist now, but was there a specific moment of crisis or a sudden period in your life when you started to question that?
I don't think there was a moment of crisis, actually. It's that's a weird element to do with growing up in a Jewish household and going to an Orthodox Jewish school. I went to a really quite an Orthodox Jewish school where I had to wear a yarmulke and eat kosher and learn Hebrew and say lots of blessings. That wasn't really what it was like in my house, so there was lots of confusion there. But the thing about Judaism, I think, is that it doesn't have a sort of deep, I mean, lots of Jews will disagree with this, but this is how I feel, deep kind of spiritual journey. It's much more of an immediate thing where you do certain things, you recite certain words, you do certain things with your clothes, you think about things in a certain way, and that gets you through the day. It doesn't do the thing that maybe Christianity or other religions do, or prepare you in a very long way for the hereafter, for heaven, for whatever. And I think it's a function of being a persecuted minority. I think Jews over many centuries were so persecuted that a lot of their rituals became a kind of almost OCD thing to sort of make me like, I'm not going to be killed in the next moment, right? And as a result, when I sort of started to disbelieve in God or disbelieve, or I don't know if I ever really completely believed him anyway, but I don't think there was that thing. Like, I'm reading a lot of Graham Greene at the moment, right? And Graham Greene's totally fantastic, and he's really Catholic. And in his books, when people have a crisis of faith, like Christians sometimes do, it's massive. It's a massive shifting of the deep roots of their personality. I am not sure that can quite happen, certainly the kind of Jewish upbringing I had. I mean, interestingly enough, this is very interesting in terms of deep questioning. Someone I know called Shalom Auslander, who's written books about growing up in very, very closed Orthodox communities and leaving it. He said when he left that community, he did feel troubled, but it sort of follows from what I say, which is it wasn't a massive kind of spiritual problem. It was that he would walk down the road and think that something bad was going to happen to him. Straightforwardly, he's thinking, oh, my child's going to get run over, or I'm going to have a heart attack. And that is right in terms of the way Judaism is immediately protected rather than anything else. And no, I didn't anyway. It's the answer. I did that. It rises. I don't know when I started absolutely calling myself an atheist. That's something that I've come to maybe in later life. That I feel that I don't feel I'm an agnostic. I don't feel I'm a humanist, all the other words. I feel to some extent, although they all have validity, they are softening of my intellectual position, which is much more fundamentalist about there being no God, even though I have much more weird sympathy and respect perhaps for religion than some atheists.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a thing you touch on at the beginning of the book about your insomnia, and we've talked about this before, but how that was a big impact for you with regards to this entire feelings around God. And can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I opened the book by talking about something which I now think I should have written the other way around, because I noticed that when I talk about it on stage, because I'm being interviewed a bit on stage at the moment about the book, I get a big laugh, which I don't get in the book. I miss it in the book by this is how comedy works, by leaving a reveal till the end. Right. So you're all going to laugh now because you know the punchline. But I begin the book by saying I am an insomniac, right? Now, what I should have done, because I realized that this is how I get to laugh, is when I first heard about death, first understood it when I was like 6 or 7, and I felt was deeply troubled by that and worried about not seeing my mum and dad at some point, and that all my loved ones would disappear. And I was deeply anxious about that. I told my mum about it, and she tried to make me feel better about it by saying, don't worry, death is like a long sleep from which you never wake up. And that's how I became a lifelong insomniac. That's how it gets a laugh, because I hold it back, but I don't do that in the book. But it's true. It is true that I am an insomniac, and I think there are many reasons for that, probably, but I do think one of them is, and the book is quite, I think the book is funny, and I think it's hopefully quite a good read, but it is quite heftily infused by anxiety about mortality. And that is something that I think is related to insomnia, because I think, I find the idea of unconsciousness quite difficult, and letting go quite difficult. I just do have also a brain that I find quite hard to switch off. So I don't know how much it's just that or a genuine fear of like, oh, I don't really want to be. Because the thing about mortality is that I think it can feel very selfish to say, oh, I'm frightened of death or whatever. It's like, do you want to live forever or what is it or whatever? But I actually, in the book, I make it clear that I think it's a much more socialized thing than that. I think what you're frightened of with death is like missing people, like missing out on people and on life and on experiences and on the way that society is, that and actually when I'm a kid in the start of the book and I'm praying to God, what I'm praying for is that I will see people again. I remember that very clearly. When I'm 6 or 7 years old, what I'm praying for is that I will see my mother and father, my best friend Saul Rosenberg, my cat. I'm praying for that, and I think that's what the actual instinct is. The fear of death is more about that than it is about like, oh, me.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I'm just thinking from my own perspective, and just for the listeners as well. I would say possibly open to anything, really. I'm not an atheist, but I'm not religious. But when my mum died, for me, that was the moment that I really sort of needed to know that there was something after death, because otherwise a person had just been taken out of my life way too young. I didn't have her in my life. She wasn't a part of our life anymore. But I guess this idea that people are kind of watching on and still experiencing you, and you're still experiencing them in some way, is very comforting for people.
It is very comforting. And it also, Yeah, I think there's an issue with feeling that our lives need to be witnessed, and that begins with our parents, right? When we're little, we're constantly in need of these people who are kind of the people who are watching our story, yeah. And without it, it sort of feels like, what's the point, and who is there for us? And actually, I quote this a writer called John Updike, who I'm very obsessed with, and who was a believer, and he relates God to the idea of a parent and to sleep. He says that when you're asleep, particularly when you're a kid or when you're trying to get to sleep, you often need to hear the sound of a parent downstairs to know that everything's okay. And he says that's what religion is as well. That's like a sense of, like, in life, you have to have a sense that there is something watching you. And I say, and my feeling is that, see, he comes to the conclusion that that's why God exists. I come to the conclusion that's what we need. So we've created God to satisfy that need, which is a more depressive kind of way of looking at it. But I understand the need completely. And I understand what you've just said completely about needing. I feel it, much later in life. I don't think it actually, I mean, it obviously is more difficult and tragic if it happens to you when you're young. And my wife actually lost her dad when she was 6. And it's obviously incredibly rupturing. But I would say that even when, like, my mum died when she was 75 and I was, whatever I was then, like, completely adult, even though it's still deeply disorientating is what it is. When those people who have been in your life forever just disappear, it's really disorientating and really hard to sort of make sense of it.
Yeah. Oh, I feel like we're having a little therapy session, actually.
Well, it's questionable.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I mean, I would say, though, as well, because religion is a very polarizing subject, and I'm sure that there'll be people that are deeply religious listening that will possibly feel a little bit, yeah, or maybe just feel a little angered or triggered in some way. But I would say the God I desire is extremely compassionate, and I think it's a very unusual perspective to come at because religion is so polarizing. Most people are either staunchly religious or they're staunchly not. Similar in terms of, like, political beliefs, people tend to attach their identity to it, and so I think it's quite impressive, actually, that you are able to kind of step away from that in terms of identity and kind of see both sides of the fence.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, really, I'm only really interested in truth, is what I'm interested in. That's my sort of only thing in my life, is that because I don't believe in God, and because I sort of don't have much in the way of what might be called conventional, I guess, morality. I'm interested in being as truthful. I think this is probably offensive to some people, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think I have a sort of almost on the spectrum need to tell the truth all the time. And one of those truth is, like, what's the truth about my relationship to religion? And it's complex. It's not simple. And when I read other atheists just dismissing religion, like they sometimes do, I just think, well, that's clearly not how I feel about it. It's not how I feel about it because I was brought up. I mean, most of them are not brought up in any kind of religious minority kind of world. And so they don't experience what I experience and what I still experience, which is that my identity is wrapped up with a culture whose roots are religious.
Right.
Now, I don't believe in God, but I still feel, as is perhaps obvious, very Jewish. And so therefore I know how sometimes inseparable, and there's a long bit in the middle of the book where I try and separate it and can't. There is kind of inseparable what your identity is if you're part of a cultural minority from certain religious roots. And so I sort of understand it much more than maybe, say, Richard Dawkins does, that some people feel that he's taking away something very, very basic about their life when he's dismissing religion. And also, I just don't believe it at some level. Like, this is a sort of more psychological thing, but when I think I quote Bertrand Russell saying, that he knows he's going to die and he doesn't care, like he basically says, I will rot and my ego will disappear, but I scorn to shiver at those who would, I scorn those who would shiver at the thought of oblivion. And I kind of think it's so macho, this is what I say, that it's so macho, this idea of, like, I'm not frightened and I don't need God, I don't need comfort. Like, why say that? Why say that? It's childish, I think, at some level, and intellectually incurious. I very much do believe that God doesn't exist, but that doesn't mean that the desire for God, the need for God, and also the stories that surround that are not sort of, they tell you a lot about what it means to be human. is
Yeah.
what I think.
Yeah.
Um,
And going back to what you're saying about parents, it kind of, for me, it's reminiscent of people that, fall out with their parents and they're like, I don't even need parents,
adolescent.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's interesting. And I know that in the book you spoke a little bit about prayer as well, and how prayer isn't, when you're sort of reading a prayer at a funeral, for example, it's not always religious. Obviously, it has religious connotations, but I guess prayer means different things for different people.
Whereas meditation is a form of prayer. I mean, I'm a meditator, but it is, prayer is a form of meditation.
Yeah, I mean, I specifically talk about how, I don't know how clear this is. I hope it is clear. Like, I was at a funeral. It's happened to me a couple of times, actually. And sometimes it's, I use the example, which happens to be the tragic situation of someone who lost a child. But I was at someone's parents' funeral as well the other day. And the words of a Hebrew prayer, if you translate them to English, I find as alienating as I find quite a lot of prayer when it's just about praising God. That's what I find alienating, just telling God that they're incredible, essentially. But the sonic sound of the Hebrew prayer, which I know very well, by the way. I know the Kaddish, which is the prayer for the dead, very well. I don't think it has anything to do with, at some level, with the English meaning. I think it's a song of pain. And I think you relate to that above meaning, or the signs of meaning, however you want to put it. I mean, weirdly, the only good argument, it's not really an argument, but the only good argument to use, I can't think of another word, for the existence of God, I don't say this in the book, and maybe I should, but maybe there's enough about him in the book anyway. It's about Frank Skinner, who's in the book quite a lot, because he's my friend who's deeply Catholic and deeply believing. But he told me once that when he takes communion and the wafer goes in his mouth, he sometimes just feels the presence of God. And what I think is that is a good existential reason to believe in God. I don't think you can argue the existence of God. You just can't. There's no logical, reasoned argument for the existence of God. But to say I feel it is also unarguable, right? And so I think that's okay, is what I think.
Yeah, it's a funny one, prayer. It's a shame that we kind of can't take more of that from Christianity as well, because I feel like with certain other religions, for example, what's written in the Bible, there's a lot of what's written in the Bible that is just brilliant for everyday advice, ways that, we can take what's in the Bible and we can use it in a more pragmatic way, but people don't tend to do that as much in other religions like Christianity.
Yeah. Well, again, I said earlier on that the book is not meant to be a, overview of religion and atheism or whatever, but obviously there are some people who want it to be what it's not. So a few people have said to me, what about the terrible things that religion's done? And what I think is, well, that is a book about the corruption and power of organized religion, which obviously is a massive book and probably written by other people or whatever. And that's not what this is about. My book is about why I think God is a mirage that is desperately needed by human beings, and I feel the need for that mirage too. That's why I'm an atheist. It's kind of a personal psychological essay, obviously with some greater social, relevance. But it's obvious that organized religion has done all sorts of terrible things. What you've just said is interesting though, because organized religion, like so many things, takes stuff from the Bible or whatever. And the Bible, it has some mental stuff in it. And as you say, it has some stuff in it that's actually pretty good. And this is another thing I say in the book is like, this is why I'm not a humanist, because humanists say we need to get rid of all religion and start a society totally based on humans and humans interacting. And what I think is, right, so that means we would lose thou shalt not kill as an idea. And they're like, why bother? Because I don't believe God inscribed that on a tablet, but I think it's still a good idea. Right. So the fact that it comes from a religious point doesn't matter if it's a good idea, is what I think.
Yeah, I guess the Bible as well it's very interpretive. I mean, I know that most people that are fundamentally Christian don't believe that it's interpretive, but personally, I think that what's written in the Bible, even the stuff that's, as you say, a bit mental, could be interpreted more as like a metaphor, and then the lesson behind it isn't that mental. There was a documentary actually a while back that looked at, it took specific Bible stories and would kind of work out what it could actually mean historically. It was more of a history documentary, really, if I'm honest. But for example, the parting of the sea, is it parting of the Red Sea?
Yeah,
Not religious.
yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, they sort of worked out it could actually have been parting of like the cornfields or something, and it was like a certain type of gust of wind had done it. It was really interesting because it actually showed that there are different ways of interpreting the Bible. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I mean, I actually wrote a play, which is called God's Dice, which it's kind of a comedy, but it's based on. I'm also obsessed with quantum physics, and quantum physics implies that if something can happen, it is happening somewhere in the infinite universe. And so I worked out in that. I didn't really work it out. I had help, but in that play, an equation is worked out for water turning into wine. Because theoretically, if a lot of completely very, very, very unlikely things happened involving lightning and all sorts of things, water could be turned into wine. If it's true that in an infinite universe, anything that can happen will happen, then theoretically, water has turned into wine. Right. Now, I don't know about the parting of the Red Sea. It's possible. Whether it's actually possible. Probably in a tsunami-like situation, it is. But none of this, for me, I should make it clear, is not. I'm not, as we speak, going back on my atheism. None of it hasn't diverted me.
Now, like, I'm trying to convert you, but
No, I know you're not. But I am interested in in how where these stories lead to, what they tell us about humans, like, and the magic and mysticism. And also, I'm interested in how that urge, that God desire urge, is reproduced in all sorts of other things. I actually think it's even reproduced in science. You see, that's what I think I talked about this in quantum physics books, tend to be very mysterious and tend to suggest that they've cracked the meaning of life and whatever in a way that feels quite religious to me. And at the end of the book, I talk about the queue for the Queen felt very, very like being worshipped like a god. And I think there's so many ways in which humanity is hardwired to find reverence and magic and worship. Buddha, I should have definitely included this in the book, and I only thought about it afterwards, but I was in Singapore a little while ago, and I went to the Buddhist temple in Singapore, which is a very beautiful place. And I don't know that much about Buddhism, but I know that the Buddha is one of the rare kind of religious icons who absolutely made it clear that he was not a god. He made it straightforward. He said, "I'm not a god, and you should not worship me as a god." If you're in the Buddhist temple in Singapore, that's not at all clear. All floors of absolute worship. At the center of it are the Buddha's teeth. Supposedly, like you have splinters of the cross in various churches or whatever. It's a and it's this massive case with gold all around it and whatever, and you're only allowed to see it, so all that stuff. And so what you think is right. So even when the head of this religion says, "Do not worship me as a god," people will, because they want to feel that something is supernaturally above us.
I guess moving slightly on, you touch on conspiracy theory, and I guess there's obviously that's quite rife at the moment in the world, and how that you need some kind of, it's like almost like a religion to those people in some ways. And yeah, I mean, what are your kind of, I guess, what are your views on conspiracy as a thing? Like, it does seem like we're living in a time of conspiracy.
Yeah. Well, yeah, in the book I talk about how conspiracy theory services the same need as religion, which is that somehow or other life will make sense, that there are secret things that only you have access to, that if you can find where the evil is, that it can be sorted out by your particular community. It's very tribal, I think. People want, especially men, it seems to me, they want to feel they've got access to secret information, which is quite a religious idea, I think. I years ago said in stand-up that conspiracy theory is how idiots get to feel like intellectuals. And I haven't really changed my mind about that, even though over that period of time, conspiracy theory has become much, much more prevalent, and people who I think are not idiots have started to propound online quite a lot of conspiratorial ideas. I was watching a TV show called Silo the other day. I don't know if you've seen it. It's on Apple TV.
Heard of it? Yeah.
It's pretty good. It's basically The Matrix. It's in The Matrix. Keanu Reeves is living in the world and he thinks there's something not quite right about it, and then takes a pill and discovers we're all secretly being controlled by aliens and blah, blah, blah. In Silo, they're living underground and they're not allowed to go out because it's all really dangerous outside. And then one woman starts to realize that's all lies and we're being blah, blah, blah. And so many films and movies promote this idea that the world is not as it seems and we're being controlled and blah, blah, blah. And that's a good story, right? It's a good story because it allows for individuals to have the truth revealed and to then sort of burst through this sort of oppression of what we're told and all that stuff. My worry is that when people start to do that in real life, online or whatever, then they can get to some very bad places. I mean, I've said the other thing I have said, and this is not my line, it was a stand-up I once saw, whose name I tragically can't remember, but an American stand-up once began his set by saying, I blame the Jews, it's easier that way, or it's quicker that way. I blame the Jews, it's quicker that way. And I mean, it is amazing how most conspiracy theories end up with the Jews. The Jews are responsible. Recently, I tried to check this out with Flat Earth. So Flat Earth, you might think, well, that's just nutters, right? And it can't be any sort of deeper thing. But actually, I looked at a Flat Earth site in order to test this theory. And if you go dig far enough, they believe, I don't know if this is all Flat Earthers, I apologize if there are any Flat Earth that you don't dig this, but the Flat Earth site I went to believed that in the middle of this whatever century, when people started realizing that the Earth was round, that this was apparently a conspiracy because the church believed, obviously, that, the universe went round the Earth and that we were at the center of the universe and the Flat Earth was sort of that. And the Jews were trying to destabilize that. They were trying to destabilize the church with the myth that the Earth was round and that we go around the sun, that we're not at the center of the universe. It's an interesting thing, actually, on that. In that I think religion and I think the God desire and I think that it's all about this idea that somehow we are more important than we are.
Yeah.
And that the individual is more important than they are. Like, that's what people always want to believe. And I sort of think we're not that important in general. I love life and I love people, but I think we're not that important. At the end of the God Desire, I talk a lot about animals and about how, I basically think that I just think we are animals. We're just slightly cleverer than animals, which has put it in this weird position where we believe all sorts of specialness about ourselves, not least that we're allowed to hunt and kill animals. And there's no problem with that, even though we are just exactly the same as them. And so much of what we do, including conspiracy theory, I think, is a way of trying to confirm that specialness, I think.
It's so true. It's something that I personally am fascinated by, the sort of weird entitlement of humans. Why?
Yeah.
But even I've questioned at times sort of why us? Why have we got language and the ability to communicate with each other in this sort of consciousness that seems slightly higher than wild animals? And I guess as humans, we are sort of storytelling creatures. We like to attach meaning to something. The idea that we're just an accident and we're just atoms floating around on it, we're ants on a planet, is terrifying, and it can be quite destabilizing for people, I think. And we do tend to sort of grip onto anything that might give us a little bit of purpose and a little bit of meaning, whether that's religion or cult.
I know, that's absolutely right. But I think your question about why us, I mean, there's lots of reasons for it, but also I as time goes on, I think there isn't that. What I mean is we're not that different. Animals do have language. I think they do have meaning, and I think they do have love and empathy. I have a little theory, which I don't think I've seen anywhere else, and I do talk about this a little bit in the book, that something that is changing and is quite a good thing as a result of the internet, and very few things are good as a result of the internet, podcasts accepted, obviously, but is that there are so many films now of animals doing human-like things that gradually it will filter into humans' understanding that animals have love, have empathy, have basically language. I think not, I don't know about story, but there's a type of storytelling that I think animals might have. I mean, you know, it's obvious with things like octopuses and whatever, but I think you definitely see it in primates. I think, and I'm on and on about it. I think you can see it in cats. I think, like, because I'm very obsessed with cats, and if you spend a lot of time with cats, what you realize is every cat has an individual personality. If every cat has an individual personality, what does that say about our notion of human exceptionalism? But that's, I think, the point I'm trying to make.
Moving slightly on to, so we talked a little bit about sort of cults and how people can kind of get sucked into cults. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about this idea of celebrity as well, because that's another really fascinating topic in terms of like why humans need to attach some kind of importance to other people and almost like a hierarchical way. And I think it is kind of related to religion. I mean, you might disagree, but I think it is kind of related to religion in some ways as well.
No, I completely agree. I mean, I think that the way that we create deities out of celebrities, and some of them are very clearly deified. Elvis, for example, the idea of not dead, or Michael Jackson, he's not dead. People don't believe these people die. You'll find online an enormous amount of conspiracy theory ideas about how very, very famous people who have died are not dead. And that's because they are gods, essentially. Therefore, immortality is something that people associate with them. And I think you do see this a lot. It comes back to what you were saying about storytelling, which is that we're telling a story to ourselves all the time about various things. And the story is never quite the truth, whatever the truth is, because I believe the truth to be, unfortunately, what you said earlier about atoms. That's the truth. It's kind of chaotic, kind of storyless thing going on, and it does have a pattern, but it's mathematical and kind of obscure and whatever. So one example is like the Philip Schofield thing, is a story was told about what this morning was, right? Now, I don't think anyone believed that. Like, who believes that? Who believes that, the smiley, bland, everything's nice all the time, there's no darkness here ever? Who believes that about humanity? But it was a story that program has always told. And then it turns out not to be true. I'm not getting into the morality, by the way, of I do think that there's very complex stuff to the way that people, well, actually one thing I will go, which is the reaction to it, forgetting for a moment about how much you're angry or not about what he did. The reaction to it, I think, is less about people really being worried about safeguarding and all the rest of it, even though that is obviously an issue, but about how the story has been broken. And people need those stories to make them feel, I don't know what exactly.
Yeah.
I don't think I personally don't think I do need those stories. I mean, an example, to be honest, is when he came out as gay, who believed that he had been faithful to his wife? Because apart from anything, if you've been married for 27 years and you've got 2 kids and then you leave your partner, I think probably you've tested it out whether or not the life you're going to is one you want.
Yeah.
Because really,
Quite long term, isn't it?
This is quite a thing to do on the basis of a hunch.
Yeah.
Which is what he was saying when he was saying, I haven't done anything. I'm really gay, but I haven't done anything.
I'm probably gay. I don't know.
Yeah, probably gay. I haven't, obviously, I haven't slept on to test out that theory because I've been faithful to my wife. Obviously, you can't think like, what the fuck? Who believed that? But I would have thought no one, but now we have to believe that everyone's really upset that they bought that life.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we won't go into it too much, but
No, I don't want to go into it too much because it's so complicated and people
is, yeah.
angry about it. But I'm just talking about the storytelling that we sort of have to believe in.
Yeah, because obviously, really, if people's shock was at the situation itself, there wouldn't be pictures of this young man plastered all over the internet because people would be, he would be the victim and, this, that and the other. But instead, it's more around the narrative, isn't it? And
yes. It's more about the sense that we've been let down. A story that we all bought into has turned out not to be real. What I think is did we buy into that story, or is there a weird double thing where everyone knew the story was not real, but we sort of needed it to be real enough that when it was broken, we're still annoyed? That's quite a complicated sentence, but do you see what I mean?
Totally. Yeah. It's and we also, as humans, I think we love to, in some ways, when we have that narrative rocked, we love to tear people down. Like how, in an extreme way. It's like let people just totally forget themselves, don't they? And they
And I guess
rush
also
to
people who we see is in a privileged position as well.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. A lot of it is just about that. But anyway, I mean, I think that, you know, I did a show a while back about fame. I'm actually doing it again. I've done 3 stand-up one-man shows over the last sort of 10 years. One was about fame, one was about my family, and one was about trolls. And I'm sort of recording them all in the autumn, which is quite daunting because I have to rewrite them and rethink about them anyway for Sky. But the first one was about fame. And in terms of what you were saying earlier, it was really just a lot of funny stories that have happened to me as a result of being in this weird position. But it was also about the weirdness of being always presented with a version of yourself that is not you. That's what fame is. Someone once said, who wrote Fear of Flying? Fear of Flying. I should know this. The woman who wrote Fear of Flying, whose name suddenly goes because I'm getting old, said that fame means millions of people will get you wrong. And that's true. That's storytelling again. That there will be a story of you that fits the fact that people who don't know you do know you. And then at that point, you become aware that it's not correct. And what's been slightly odd for me is that because I'm obsessed with truth and authenticity, I've spent quite a lot of my time muddying any story about me. So for example, when I first appeared back in the 90s, there was a lot of stuff about me being a lad. And I always thought, well, not really. I don't drink. I'm monogamous. Like, what is this? What is this? So I just talk about football. And so, but because people want there to be a straightforward story where you talk about football, therefore, and then it became important to me to sort of undercut that. And I remember seeing a review of one of my early novels saying, why does David Baddiel feel this need to constantly muddy who he is? I think I'm not muddying who I am. I'm just trying to express who I am with complexity. But I think that's when you talk about celebrity, a lot of celebrities don't want to do that. They want to have a brand that is quite straightforward. And I'll be honest with you, I think that is successful. I think what I want to do is less successful, but I feel a need to do it. I feel a need to do it because I'm obsessed with some kind of truth, but I think it doesn't necessarily help you have mass appeal if that's what you want.
I don't know. It worked for Buddha.
Well, it didn't work for Buddha because Buddha is dead and people are worshipping him as a god. That's not what he wanted.
He tried the whole don't worship me. It's like you going, oh, I don't drink. I'm not allowed to it.
I don't know that he's thought of as a celebrity exactly. Although maybe, I don't know.
Well, it's the same thing, isn't it? You know, God's celebrities. It's what we do the same thing in our minds with both, I think. It would be interesting.
He was a prince, actually. I don't know enough about it, so I apologize to any Buddhists listening. Actually, Lee Mack is a Buddhist. Did you know that?
Is he? I didn't know that.
Yeah, Lee Mack does a Buddhist podcast. And when he read The God Desire, he said, listen to my Buddhist podcast. So I listened to a couple of episodes. It was mainly him being funny, of course. But I think he was a prince, not Lee, the Buddha, and they renounced it all in order to, find whatever he found through poverty and stuff. So that feels quite like a celebrity thing to do. That feels quite like a Channel 5 program.
Yeah, the artist formerly known as Buddha.
Yeah, or Prince Charles, not please no Prince William. It will be now. Just to spend a week living in poverty.
Yeah, exactly. Oh god.
Going on, you were talking about obviously your show Trolls, and I know you did a lot of work on social media, did your documentary, which was fascinating. And I wondered actually if you've changed how you use social media much since going through that process, because I know you did a lot of experiments and you came off Twitter, for example, for a couple of weeks. And
longer. I've come off it since then for longer periods of time. Yeah, no, I don't think of it in exactly the same way anymore. And that'll be interesting when I do the Trolls show, the Trolls show is very much based on a quite combative thing, which is that when you get trolled, you should treat them like hecklers. And as a comedian, you're responsible to try and make them funny. And I used to do it all the time. And then I've stopped doing that. Not completely. Every so often I dip my toe in that water, but most time I just don't look at responses anymore. Because I do think social media, particularly Twitter, is just, it's a space of anger. I said this in the social media program, that I think the problem with social media is that you think it's a marketplace of ideas, and that's probably what I thought it was when it first appeared. It's not. It's a marketplace of identity. And once it becomes a marketplace of identity, people think, how do I promote my identity? I have to do it in an oppositional way, because there aren't that many ways to say, for example, I'm an anti-vaxxer, except by saying, I hate vaccines. See what I'm saying? That's how you create an identity, is by saying, I hate the thing that is not my identity. And so now when I occasionally go on it, it just seems to be people wanting to confirm their identity by being angry with the people who are their perceived opposites. And that's just a waste of fucking time. And so I don't spend anything like the time on it I used to. And I tend mostly to just tweet things, jokes. I just tweeted a joke about this morning, which has gone quite well, or promotional stuff. And that's it really. I very occasionally, because of my role, which has come upon me to some extent as being a spokesperson, activist for anti-Semitism, against anti-Semitism, I feel the need to say something about Roger Waters or someone who's being, in my opinion, is crossing some kind of line there. It happened recently with Joe Rogan, actually. But even that, I don't do as much as I used to, because I just think Twitter is not a useful space to talk about these complex things.
Yeah, you can't argue with these people. It's
No, you can't argue, and people want to argue. And, whatever happens, whatever you say, people will find ways of, taking what you say. And this comes down to the truth thing, the authenticity thing. They will take what you say and make it mean something else. Because they're not really interested in a conversation. They're interested in their thing being promoted, like at the expense of yours or whatever. I mean, I still see, funny stuff on there, witty stuff on there, insightful stuff on there for people that I follow, and that's great. But any kind of, once it becomes an interaction, that's when I think like there's no point, because unless it's like a really sweet interaction. So I post a lot of cat pictures. I post a lot of cat pictures, partly because I love cats and I'm always fascinated by cats. I have 4 cats. But also, I guess I also post them because if I post a picture of a cat with I don't just post a picture, I normally have a thought about a cat, then people will respond in a, nice way. There's no other way of putting it. I know that sounds very bland, but even though there'll still be some trolls somehow, probably in a cat, but most people are just telling me about their cats. And that's all quite nice. And it creates an idea of a social media network that is a kind of phantom, which is that somewhere back in the midst of time, it could have just been like this, but now it's not. It is just people shouting and being angry.
Yeah, I have to admit, I've got quite a positive experience with Twitter, because I literally, I'm an artist and I only post my art, and the only people I get on there are nice people saying nice things about my art, and they're just lovely. And to be honest, I don't really go down the timeline, so I don't see people shouting about their miserable stuff. So nice.
That's interesting, Sophie, because I think that, like, the reason I feel this is obviously I have talked about controversial subjects, principally anti-Semitism, but other subjects as well. And you should be able to say things like that without it just becoming a huge row. But I think, in a way, what you're expressing there is right, which is like it's a place where hopefully you could just put up some pictures of art and people would just be okay, interesting, nice, whatever, appreciative about it. But I think the minute you strayed, like say you did a picture, right, of something with a political message in it, if you are straying into any kind of controversial waters, you will get some people saying so. I mean, just to go back to the animals thing, is I've talked online about how, and posted pictures of, like, I think it was a donkey seeing its owner after many years. It's the one who brought it up, and obviously expressing love for this person. And I wrote about that, about how it was moving, but how it was also about how I'm feel that human exceptionalism is a myth, is a story, and you can see this animal with what we consider to be human qualities, empathy, love, whatever. Now that, although a few people are nice about it, leads to lots of people getting really angry and saying, you're just imagining it. You're just anthropomorphizing this animal. It just thinks that it's got food on its way. They don't like it. They find. So what I'm saying is that you don't have to go very far. That feels to me not a very controversial thing to make for people to get angry.
Yeah, totally. Oh, I've had people like I've posted a painting of a shark, and people are like, "Sharks kill humans," but it was a whale shark. It was a whale shark. They don't eat. They couldn't even eat humans if they wanted to. It's just so ridiculous. But yeah, it's funny how
but sharks do kill humans, which some do. That's not a reason not to post a picture of a shark.
Humans kill humans quite a lot.
Humans kill humans. Lions also. What, we're never posting a picture of a lion ever.
you never see a shark walk out of the water and kill someone in their own home, do you? So
Well, though, what's interesting about that as well is that I think it's now becoming possible, and social media has done this as well, to say anything that feels like just a sort of thing in itself. But what I mean is, like, people have to attach some kind of aggressive meaning to things. So you posting a picture of a shark is seen for some reason as a celebration of a shark and its killing abilities, rather than just it's a picture of a shark. Rather, some people think, no, clearly it means this. And you think, like, well, no, it obviously doesn't, but you want it to be that because you want to be angry.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that's what's happening.
Yeah, one thing that really interested me, because I watched your show about social media, and when you went into the scanner to scan your brain and read sort of negative tweets about yourself, and it flared up all of the stress responses in your brain. And I've always wondered if they did that similar test on people while they were tweeting something aggressive, if it would flare up similar things in the brain, almost like an addictive adrenaline rush of getting involved in it. Because I've certainly seen things on Twitter before that have like angered me once or twice, where my heart rate started going, and it's like a physiological response. And I can see how it's a fine line between seeing that as like a bad thing and a stress response, or seeing it as like an excitement, because they're really the two sides of the same coin, aren't they?
Yeah, I really agree with that. And actually, that's mainly what I try and avoid. Because I think it is bad for your mental health, and you can feel it. Definitely, you can. If I was to decide for no good reason that I'm going to check all my responses, 10% of them or something would be incredibly hateful, and you can feel that. And it's a weird thing, interesting, that some people claim. I mean, it's a bit like what I was saying about the machismo of atheists. Some people claim, I think, for it's not a problem and whatever. It's just people on Twitter. Who cares? Is what they think. And I kind of think, like, okay, but do you not have that physiological response then when someone just writes something unbelievably hateful, sort of death threat level, blah blah blah, thing about you? Then what is it that you're not feeling? And I don't know if I believe it. I don't know if I believe it. But you can probably be inured to it. I guess if you want to, which I don't, you could probably end up like, oh, I've seen this so often it doesn't affect me.
I wonder. I've got a theory about this, though. I'd love to know your thoughts on this. I personally, just my own experience, and just from other like friends and stuff like that, when someone says something nasty about you that's so outlandish that you can't attach any, you can't connect with that in any way. It's like almost hilarious. It just goes over my head. But if someone were to say something quite personal that deep down I believe about myself, or I've rejected within myself in some way, it really stings. So if someone were to say, I don't know, you're only posting online pictures of your artwork to get attention, that would probably hurt, because then I'd start to think, oh my God, like, am I? Because I do want attention for my artwork, because that's how I survive, and you start to question your own identity. Whereas if someone were to say something completely out there that I know to be not true in any way, I don't think it would bother me, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think it's slightly different responses. Well, that's a really interesting point. So I think sometimes when you read something about yourself that is really not true, there's one type of response, which is the sort of unfairness that you feel frustrated and angry that it's so unfair. But then, every so often you read something that makes you think like, oh God, they're sort of digging away at some anxiety or whatever. Recently, there's probably people listening that will love this, but never mind. Because it was interesting, is that a guy wrote a piece about anti-Semitism in football in The Guardian. And I've done lots of work on that specific subject. And I retweeted it, and I made a joke about how he hadn't mentioned any of the work that I'd done about it. And I said, but hurt though I am about that, I still think this is a good piece. And then it got taken up by a lot of people who hate me as like, this is David Baddiel being like so narcissistic that he has to talk about himself and blah, blah, blah. And one person said, this is a good example of someone who just thinks, that the stuff they've done is most important, and the stuff that this guy's done is not as important, but he's pretending that it is. And there's all this thing. And I thought, it's interesting that, because he might be right, that person. He might be right about why I needed to say that. But then I thought something would be impossible, which is a shame, which is like, I might have been able to respond to that and say, you know what? There probably is an element of my own flawed vulnerability about how I was sort of vaguely ignored in this piece that needed me to say that. But isn't it okay to display my flawed vulnerability? Isn't that okay? Instead of being slammed and slammed and slammed for it. That's what I think, is that your point about, do I do feel that? Or maybe you do. But that's not bad, because probably everyone at some level has got attention-seeking reasons for wanting to create X, Y, or Z. That doesn't mean that your art is shit. It doesn't, right? It just means that there's complex motivations for it. Your art will have a quality.
I'm going to add that to my website. Thank you.
Sorry, but it will. Anyone who creates anything, there'll be some motivations will be shallow and some won't be. And that's another example of the complexity that Twitter shuts down, because Twitter is about winning and losing. And someone wants to say, you're a loser because you've said this. And well, maybe the talking about how it's a loss or a flaw or whatever is a good thing, but now it feels just like impossible to talk about because you've made it a triumph of whatever, your side, that I've said this.
Yeah, it's very polarizing. I mean, you've had sort of copious amounts of social media stuff, haven't you, over the years? So sat there listening.
You sort of moved away from it for a bit, didn't you? You went off Twitter for a bit.
I did. I had 6 months away from it, which was glorious.
Why did you come back?
I don't know. I probably need to sell a book or something, which is, I'm so narcissistic, but
On the way. It's up on the way.
yeah. You get drawn back in, don't you? Because, particularly if you have got a large following, it does become part of, as a freelance creative, it is part of your job. We're all little small businesses, aren't we? And we do have to market ourselves. But yeah, it was certainly an interesting period of reflection. And like you, I use it very much differently than I did before.
I went off it after my Jews Don't Count film went out, because I knew there'd be a lot of shouting about that, and people would tell it, you've been trending for weeks or whatever. And then it became clear to me that I could, if I wanted, to go back on, because the shouting had stopped, like it does. And I didn't want to at that point, which was really not like it was the first time I came off. The first time I came off, I was fairly desperate to get on that one, the social media film. The second time, I thought I'll go off for a week, and then I was off for like a month and a half, because I just thought, oh God, it really is nicer not to be have that, like, you probably don't have this, Sophie, but Giles will know what I mean, a sort of underlying anxiety about that someone has decided to, try and make you the villain of the week. Or villain of the
it's the targeting. This thing is interesting. The targeting, when you become someone's main focus for a while.
Mm.
Yeah.
And it just keep going until they get your attention. Or
I mean, there's a documentary to be made, which I'm not going to do because I've done a documentary about social media, but something I didn't really go into in that documentary, which is the coordination and processing and sort of administration of how that happens. Because, I will say every so often, I won't anymore because I don't engage, but I used to say, this is obviously a bot. And I kind of not exactly sure what I mean by that, because I kind of think like, but it's still a person, but it's person. But it might be a person that's like one of 27 sock puppet accounts that are all trying to have a go at you. So they're sort of a bot. But I don't really know how that works, to be honest.
I've read something about this. I can't remember where, though. I'm thinking might have been in a John Ronson book. Well, I can't remember. We can cut that out if it wasn't. But anyway, it was doing a little experiment on some hate that someone was getting, and they worked out that pretty much all of the accounts were linked to one person.
One person, yeah. Yeah.
And it's and I was just going back to what you were saying earlier, Giles, about, you know, how it can hurt to have someone make you the focus of their hatred. From an outsider's perspective, for me, looking in on your situation, for example, or your situation, David, it feels almost laughable, because it's like, well, isn't that sad that someone's whole day is devoted to sort of creating hate or spreading hate or being nasty to you like that? That feels kind of pathetic to me. But when you're the target of it, I can imagine it feels bloody awful.
Yeah, I mean, I think on a larger framework, to sort of move away from like the individual, is I was reading this morning about how incidents on aeroplanes of disruption and antisocial behaviour have got much, much worse since 2013. Now, I think it's wrong to ascribe every single thing that happens in society to social media. But I do think that, like, when I read about stuff like that, I do think what social media fosters is a sense that if you feel angry, you can just express it and it doesn't matter. Because in the old days, you never really saw anyone being that angry all the fucking time. But now you literally just have to turn on your computer and there's so much anger. And that, I think, does bleed out to real life, whatever real life is. And so when you read about any space in which there's somehow more anger, more disruption, more people being violent or whatever than they used to be. I mean, it's an interesting thing, actually, and which is the specific thing, apparently, is that on planes, and obviously this is related to another technological phenomenon, but where people want to vape. Yeah. Right. And they're refusing when stewards say you're not allowed to. They just get angry and they fight or swear or whatever. And I think obviously that's related to addiction to vaping, but it's related to something else, which is just this sense of massive entitlement that social media has bred of, like, no, I want to be able to do what I want. I want to be able to say what I want. And if it's anger that I want to express, I'm going to just express it. Even though the other person, like a poor steward on a plane, is going to be really upset by it. The same way that people don't think when they're being horrible that there's another person on the end of that.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's ironic, isn't it, that social media has kind of connected us all to people all over the world, but at the same time we seem to have lost a sense of community, because there comes a point where you forget that people are people, because you just see them as these faceless online identities. And I guess it would seem that's bled out into society, where you go out into the world and you forget that the stewardess is a human with, you know, just doing their job.
Yeah, a friend of mine who's is a musical theatre performer said that has always had a bit of criticism online, but then started to see it at stage door. So people would come to the show specifically to troll them in real life.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that's happening. I definitely think that the normalization of trolling, basically, the normalization of anger and rage, and like the lack of restraint that you might think, oh, this is perhaps something I need to keep to myself, that there's definitely spills out into real life. And in terms of what you were saying about community, I think who would know this would happen? But yes, when you hear about it in 2009, you think, well, that will create this worldwide community. But instead, what it's created is a whole load of fragmented communities who are all at war with each other. That's what it's created.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? It's a shame. I mean, I don't know. I feel like I have made some friends on using social media, but
Yeah, so have I. Yeah, so have I. That's true. Giles is one of them.
Yeah, well, we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't.
And we shouldn't be too negative. And there's definitely people who I've never met who I feel I know because of it, who are very nice. And there is niceness. And actually, that social media documentary ends on an up note where my dad was ill. Sandy, my dad, no longer with us, but he was ill. And I posted about that. And you just get loads and loads of love. And I think that's definitely true about human beings. Like, human beings will express love and are often lovely. The problem is, I think, that power devolves, we know this, to the negative. And so the people who are lovely they haven't got a thing to say unless it's a catalyst like, oh, that man's father is ill, so I'll say something. Whereas the angry people have constantly got things to say.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's true, actually. It's a good point.
Well, David, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time. One last question. Can you please tell us the names of your 4 cats?
Yeah. So they're all part of the same family. So the mum, I mean, she had many other kittens, but we gave them all away. So the mum is called Pip. Her 2 immediate sons are called Ron and Tiger. And then my dad, when he died, had one of them as well called Zelda. And so Zelda has now appeared, but unlike an episode of Long Lost Family, they don't like each other. They spend most of their time shouting at each other, and it's like Twitter to some extent. A lot of anger and a lot of rage and a lot of territorialness. But I think they're gradually getting to coexist. So
Yeah, we've only got the 1 cat, but and like you say, such personalities different cats have got. It's amazing, and he's hilarious. I mean, there's every day he makes me laugh.
Yeah, no, the cats are incredible, I think. I've been trying for a while and failing to do a TV show. I do these TV shows that I guess are quite intellectual or whatever, but I really want to do a show called David Bill Catman, where I just go and see cats. People write to me and say, oh, my cat does this amazing thing, and I go and see them, and that's the whole show. And I would love to do that.
Well, please come to see my cat, because
Yeah,
he is very funny.
Mitz is brilliant and sits like a little old man.
Yeah, I'll send you some pictures though, because he actually sits up. He sits upright like a man in a seat. He's hilarious.
Send me that. That sounds fantastic.
Are you mostly just interested in domestic cats, or are you into big cats as well?
Well, I definitely like big cats as well. I definitely am fascinated by big cats. In fact, I'm really fascinated by the fact that, as far as I know, the cat is the only animal that has a small version and a big version that are almost exactly the same, if you see what I mean. So there are smaller monkeys and bigger monkeys or whatever, but they're different generally. Like a macaque is quite different from a gorilla or whatever. But a domestic cat is a small lion, as far as I can make out. And I think that's brilliant as well. There's something brilliant about cats. I also think, I will down to talk about cats forever.
Yeah,
but
that's cool.
they are also the only animal that have colonized us, right? Which is an amazing thing. Like dogs, we decided many years ago to breed for work and, be sheepdogs and guard dogs and whatever. And that led to the relationship between dog and cats worked out. If we hang around these monkeys, then they will give us food. And we will make ourselves kind of like quite nice for them. Like we'll sort of generally be a bit affectionate towards them. And that's an incredible thing.
Yeah. And then going full circle, we ended up worshipping them at some points as society. So the God desire.
God desire. Well, that I often think cats would be an absolutely okay thing to worship. I think the Egyptians did. I've got to go. Just got an email telling me I have to join a meeting.
Thank you so
Really
much,
appreciate your
David.
time.